Undead Murder Farce is a fantastic blend of Eastern and Western storytelling that packs an insane amount of action and characters into just 13 episodes. The Japanese title is Undead Girl Murder Farce, and that girl in the title is Aya Rindo, an excellent detective who specializes in cases involving monsters. She's also an immortal severed head who has lost the rest of her body. I mean, it was stolen from her, she didn't drop it between the couch cushions. She teams up with Suguru Shinuchi, a self-styled performance artist who uses his hybrid Oni powers to become a feared fighter. Along with Aya's skilled but somewhat cold maid Shizuku, the three of them form the world's unlikeliest detective group and start solving monster crimes while they search for Aya's body. The show is structured as 4 main arcs. The first episode takes place in Japan and introduces us to the 3 main characters. The second arc is 3 episodes long, and it's about a vampire family in France. The third arc takes place in England. It's 4 episodes long and deals with a black diamond called the Penultimate Night. And the show ends with 5 episodes about a werewolf village in Germany. I really enjoyed the main cast and all those cameos from famous fictional characters and historical figures of the 19th century. Of course, I'm a sucker for a good detective story, and Undead Murder Farce is a pretty good one. Let's check it out. When most people hear the word farce, they probably think of a comedy or some type of ludicrous charade that takes a serious situation and mocks it. Undead Murder Farce has plenty of this, but it's also a great example of the original 18th century use of the word, and I think that's intentional. Back then, a farce was a type of play. Yes, it was a comedy, but it also had some distinguishing characteristics, like a large cast and several interweaving plot lines that would keep building and building until they converged into a dizzying and fast-paced climax. The focus was less on developing individual characters and more on building up the proportions of the eventual clash so that it would feel like a storm had broken out by the end. Undead Murder Farce follows this perfectly, especially in the arc where everyone's trying to get the Black Diamond, which was my favorite arc in the series. By my count, at the end of that arc, there were at least 16 or 17 different named characters belonging to 6 different factions, all competing to control possession of the diamond. The last episode of that arc kept cross-cutting between several different fights about every 20 seconds or so. It was pretty crazy. But there's actually a clever trick that the show used to be able to cram so many characters into such a short anime without having the viewer feel totally bewildered. Undead Murder Farce uses its literary references to make it easier to follow along with the show. Typically, a farce is meant to be a bit confusing. You're supposed to feel a sense of bewilderment as all these people with differing goals and imperfect understanding compete to see who's going to get their way. Now, normally it can be tough to tell who's who and who's on which side, but the brilliance of Undead Murder Farce is that you already know the characters. Maybe you don't know Phileas Fogg, but you do know who Sherlock Holmes is. Or maybe you're hazy on Aleister Crowley, but you've heard of the Phantom of the Opera. And of course, every Japanese viewer will know who Lupin is. These characters come with a pre-made backstory that we as viewers are already familiar with, so we have to devote fewer mental resources to learning who they are. The main new characters, Tsuguru, Aya, and Shizuku the maid, take a bit more getting used to. That's why the show helps us to get to know them right away in the first episode. The entire episode is teaching us who these characters are, so that they're familiar once the show starts introducing characters who need less of an introduction. This kind of built-in shorthand for knowing who is who comes in pretty handy when the cast starts getting fairly large and you have all these groups competing against each other. Undead Murder Farce is a Japanese love letter to the Victorian era in Europe. The anime borrows many of its characters and settings from Gothic literature of the 1800s. Monsters like vampires and werewolves are classic Gothic. Several characters from literature show up. I've mentioned Sherlock Holmes and the Phantom of the Opera. There's also this fun mashup of Victor Frankenstein and his monster that the show just calls Victor. There are also a few real-life historical figures from Victorian times, such as the occultist Aleister Crowley, although most of what he's known for took place in the 20th century. There are a few other historical figures, but the show makes a pretty big deal about one of the reveals, so I don't want to spoil anything. You also see the Gothic influence with the show's atmosphere of blood and body horror. This is not an excessively gory show by any means, but you do get a lot of neck bites and bullet wounds, and the occasional puddle of blood. In true Gothic fashion, this violence is often interwoven with seduction or sexuality, especially by one character in particular. So while Crunchyroll's TV-14 rating seems pretty accurate, it's probably a little edgier than your typical Knives Out or Agatha Christie mystery. I thought the scariest part of the show was when Aya was alone and lying in the road, and you realize how helpless she is as 2 hoodlums approach her. She asks them for help at first, but when it becomes clear that they've got some really creepy intentions, it's one of the few times that we see Aya lose her composure. Maybe for the first time in the series, we see fear on Aya's face as her mind races over just what these unsavory characters could do to or with a woman's severed head. Don't think about it too much. The fact that the show doesn't spell out what these two might be thinking makes it even scarier, because it allows the viewer's imagination to run wild. The first episode of the anime takes place in Japan before moving to Europe for all the other episodes. I wonder if that was meant to orient the Japanese audience to the show in a familiar location before jumping into the deep end of this homage to foreign characters and places. There are also bits of Japanese culture that find their way in throughout the show, such as when the maid Shizuku is able to impress some German werewolves by showing them the proper way to make tea. The show also uses elements from traditional Rakugo storytelling and even kabuki theater at times, mostly through Suguru, but Aya will occasionally join in as well. A lot of the humorous banter between Aya and Suguru follow the comedic beats of a Rakugo performance, and Suguru will often adopt the persona and mannerisms of a traditional storyteller as his go-to identity for social situations. I got the sense that he was always using this facade of a bumbling clown to hide his true thoughts and feelings, and this made him more interesting than just a forced bit of comic relief. Suguru's exaggerated face and voice at the end of episode 5 are a good example of how he brings in traditional Japanese storytelling techniques. This gives the show a distinctly Japanese flavor in the midst of all those Victorian lit references, and the comedic elements of those storytelling types contribute to the idea of the show being a farce. It's kind of like serving Japanese matcha tea at a British tea service with crumpets and scones. The pairing works surprisingly well. Suguru's Rakugo impressions are one of the main reasons I recommend watching the show subbed, even if it does get a dub sometime in the future. That mix of traditional Japanese storytelling with 1800s European themes is one of the main selling points of the show. You're just not going to get the full impact from a dub. As for the music, I really like the OP for the show, both the sound and the visuals. It showed off the anime's action capabilities, its atmosphere, and some of the creativity of the show's directing team. The ED was fine, but it didn't really stand out. I found myself skipping it towards the show's second half, especially if I was watching multiple episodes in a row. While I did enjoy all of Undead Murder Farce, I felt like the last arc in the Werewolf Village was probably the weakest part of the show. That arc introduced two characters that I found extremely annoying, and the season's ending left me pretty unsatisfied. I won't spoil why, but I'll just say that I disagreed with how Aya wrapped up the final case. It's still a great show up to that point though, so I'm giving it a full recommendation, but I did have to dock it for that ending. I give Undead Murder Farce 8 out of 10 immortal severed heads. The show appeals to fans of intense action as well as cerebral detective shows alike. That's pretty rare. There's more than enough unfinished business to merit a second season, and with how popular the show has been, I'm hoping we won't have to wait too long for a season 2 announcement. Let me know your thoughts about Undead Murder Farce down in the comments, and on a more personal note, it feels pretty good to get back in front of the camera. I had to take about a 3-month break to try and recover from open heart surgery. I'm finally feeling pretty good again, so there should be some more videos in the future. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.